Welcome to the Equal Opportunities Committee. It's the 5th meeting of 2014. Can you please set any electronic devices to flight mode or switch off, please? Today's first agenda item is the decision on taking business in private. You're asked to agree to take the third meeting on today's agenda and our inquiry into having and keeping a home in private at this and future meetings. Have we all agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We now move on to our second item of business, which is an evidence session on our fathers in parenting inquiry. We'll start the session with some introductions. At the table we have our clerking and research team, official reporters and broadcasting services. And around the room we're also supported by the Security Office. My name is Margaret McCulloch and I'm the committee's convener. And I'm going to now invite members and witnesses to introduce themselves in turn, starting here on my right.
My name is Robert Hall. I am chairman of the Family Men Playgroup from Hamilton, and I have a 15-month-old daughter.
My name is John Mason. I'm the MSP for Glasgow Shettleston, and I have no children.
Neil McIntosh from One Parent Family Scotland. I look after our children and lone parent fathers services.
Hi, I'm Siobhan Bahan. I'm MSP for Central Scotland.
Hi, I'm Michelle Campbell. I'm the Volunteer Development Coordinator for Five Gingerbread.
Alec Johnston, member of the committee in North East Scotland.
Hi, I'm David Drysdale, National Development Manager for Fathers Network Scotland.
Hi, I'm Kenny Spence. I'm the Joint Manager of Edinburgh Lone Fathers Club. I also manage Main Childcare and Government Child Family Centre.
I'm Marco Biaggi. I'm the MSP for Edinburgh Central, Deputy Convener of the committee, and I don't have children either, but I do have a father.
My name's Thomas. I'm from Dad's Rock, and yes, I do have a child. I saw him this morning.
Morning, John Finney, MSP Highlands and Islands.
Claire Simpson, I'm from Parenting Across Scotland. It's a partnership of 9 different charities: Abalawa, Capability, Children in Scotland, Children First, One Parent Family Scotland, Relationships Scotland, Scottish Adoption and The Spark.
Hello, I'm Ewan Jeffrey from KDAD Scotland. I have an adopted 27-year-old son.
Good morning, I'm Christian Allard, member of the Scottish Parliament for North Scotland.
Thank you all very much. Last week we actually had fathers coming along and giving us their experience of bringing up their children. We have got committee members that are going to ask you questions. The first question I would probably like to ask is if your support groups are aimed at fathers and parents with infants as well as older children, and do your groups that you've actually have offer support for new parents as well? Can also say as well, if anybody wants to actually ask a question, if they could indicate to myself or the clerk, and we'll add you onto the list. And we've got Thomas first of all.
Yeah, certainly when we started Dad's Rock Playgroup, we were just looking for somewhere to take our kids, and our kids were toddlers, but it's a preschool playgroup, so we have kids from age 0 up to age 5 or just about 6. So we like to say that our playgroups are just a broad church for any dad, any male carer to come with their kids. And I think it's important to have that mix. We keep talking about, because of the success we've had and because of how our groups are growing, we keep talking about perhaps splitting the groups and segregating ages of kids because we've got that many coming. But I think we'd maybe lose something. And, you know, we have some dads who come who have got very young babies. And really, they're coming for themselves, you know, because the babies, there's very little that they're actually going to do in a playgroup. But the dads are coming for themselves because they want to be with other dads.
Kenny?
We have parents with babies as young as 6 weeks and all the way up to 5 and older siblings. But we've also done some work with the health visitors with the dads before birth of the child, because there's not an awful lot out there that actually supports dads pre-birth, so we've done some work with the health visitors doing that as well. So it's a mixture of younger children and older children. The main prerequisite for the group is there has to be a child that's under, or three or under, because our funding initially started out as Sure Start funding. That's pretty much it.
Does anybody else? Neil?
Yeah, our groups work with lone parent and contact fathers, and they can have children of any age, usually school age. But what we find is that in the group work, there's a lot of peer support that fathers gain from each other, and sometimes fathers with younger children gain a lot from the experience of fathers with older children as well.
Excellent. Was it Michelle?
We have several projects within Five Gingerbread that support lone parents, lone parent mothers and lone parent fathers, as well as lone parent kinship carers. The two projects, one, the Teen Parent Project, provides support to teen parents aged 16 and 19, and that encourages both female and male to attend Mellow Baby classes, parenting programme classes, and that's well attended by lone fathers who are actively involved in baby massage, learning baby weaning, engaging in helping to develop healthy eating. We also have our Gateway project, which is a project for families. It's family learning and family issues within the community, and that's working with lone dads and lone mothers again, or both together. But the family learning aspect on that is to help parents become involved in their children's life through education.
Can I ask, how do people find out about your organisation to actually come along to it?
Our organisation is a charitable organisation, and our referrals come through self-referrals. It's done through referrals for social work, health, housing, and it's then advertised on the website, flyers, media, school. It's quite publicly advertised.
So that's great. Robert?
Our group it was primarily set up a bit like Thomas to allow dads quality time to come along and spend with their children in the sort of first instance, and that's how I started off going to the group. Unfortunately, fortunately actually, I then took it over when the gentleman who started it left. But now it's actually turned into more of a kind of network of support as well. I'm a new father of 15 months, and actually it's very useful having other dads who are there who have older children and having the ability to spend time speaking to them about some of the issues. You know, how have you dealt with this? Is this normal, if you like? And actually that's helped a lot of the dads, and we have babies. Our youngest was 3 months when they started, which is not, you know, playgroup side of things. It's more just coming along for the contact and actually getting a chance to speak to other dads and see what it's all about, and you know, pick up handy hints and tips. So very, very useful.
That's excellent. Anybody else like to comment? No. Can I now pass you over to Alex to ask some questions?
Thank you, Convener. Last week, when we had a number of men forward talking about their experiences, they talked, for example, about early years provision. In fact, we had a suggestion that while antenatal classes are perhaps often aimed at both parents, much of the postnatal support is mother-centred. Do the organisations you represent, first of all, provide a more balanced approach, but do you think there is a problem with mother-centred care for young children?
I think there's some great services in Scotland, and I think if you look at the Dads to Be resource, which was developed by people sitting around this table, that is Dad's Antenatal. What I don't understand is why is that not across the whole of Scotland? We've got a little pocket in West Lothian where somebody from the NHS has been delivering that course for 10 years, and it's an amazing course. I went to it, and they've got such a mix of dads from all walks of life in that course. Why is that not across the whole NHS? I went to antenatal. I wanted to be an active, involved dad, but it's crap. It is really rubbish. It is embarrassing. And I've spoken to dads who have been asked to leave antenatal groups, postnatal groups, sorry, antenatal groups, sorry, because of that whole embarrassment for the mothers. You know, that it's not appropriate perhaps for dads to hear some stuff. There's this secret, it seems, in NHS that we don't want to be honest about childbirth. We don't want to tell you about the trauma that could come from childbirth. We want to just tell you all the nice stuff, and we'll show you this video from the 1970s. I think there's some great services, but there's also some stuff that just needs to be thrown out and started again. So do I think that services are mummy-centric? Definitely. And I think that, you know, we need to be careful how we do rebalance it. But I think we need to, first of all, start with a position of let's try and get the dads seen. As a new dad, I felt like I was invisible. I felt like nobody spoke to me. I asked the NHS, because I was looking for young dads in Edinburgh, and I said to the NHS, where can I find young dads, and where can I find the ages of dads when their kids are born? And the NHS said they don't record the age of a father when the kids are born, they record the age of a mother. And I said to the NHS, OK, so how no? And when are you going to change that? And they've never replied to that. So I think, you know, there's some... I think the NHS is a juggernaut, and to change that is going to be really difficult. But you guys need to influence that. We all need to influence that because we want this society to be better. And that's why we're here. So, you know, I think there's an absolute reason why mums have been focused on and so much energy has been given towards them. But now it's time to just redress that balance slightly. Thank you.
Do you feel that the NHS just feels it's not its job to support fathers in that position?
Sometimes I think the NHS doesn't care about certain pockets of society. I went to all the antenatal classes. I took time off work, and there were other dads there, but there was a whole raft of parents who weren't at those antenatal classes. And I think that they've written something 20, 30 years ago and never really bothered. And with the best will in the world, I think the midwives, the health visitors, they all mean well, and they've all got a great attitude, but there's just not enough of them. And when I went, I was in a group of 8. I understand in Edinburgh now that you generally are in a group of 20 or 30 parents in a room. That's not a class, that's a lecture. And, you know, I just don't understand why in such a small country we have so many inconsistencies for the delivery of this service. To me, antenatal and postnatal, it's not rocket science. I used to be a volunteer counsellor at a postnatal depression service in Edinburgh. And, you know, I used to get all the dads, whenever they had a man come in who was suffering from postnatal depression, they would send them to me because I was a man. And, you know, it's just so underreported, the fact that I remember being a young, a new dad and feeling quite stressed and quite anxious. I wouldn't say I was depressed, but I didn't know where to go, didn't know who to speak to. And then I found David from Fathers Network. And that helped. So I think we have a long way to go.
I think Neil would like to comment.
I was just going to agree with what Thomas was saying. In our experience, the fathers that we have spoken to before we put the submission in writing told us that the services in the early years were inconsistent across the country. In some areas there is really good practice that fathers value, and they would like to see that available to other fathers. But I think there is an issue in the early years as well, that there aren't a lot of men working in the early years, and the fathers that we spoke to said that that's something they would like to see us encouraging and promoting more men to work in the early years services.
Claire?
I think a couple of things. One is that, you know, there is perception that it's a mother's job. I think that's very much kind of reinforced by the system of parental leave that we have in this country, where women are entitled to far greater parental leave and men don't get paid parental leave. And I think men are generally much more active in their children's lives and able to be and active in the early years and in early years services. I'd draw your attention to the additional evidence that was submitted by Fathers Network Scotland from Gary Clapton about father-proofing of materials, because I think it's a consistent problem about sort of portrayal of who is a family, and generally speaking that's mother and, you know, 1, 2 children, whatever. I think one thing that this committee could proactively do, well, I'm hoping you might, because I just sent a letter the other day to Scottish Government about the childcare provisions of the Children and Young People's Bill. And in April, Scottish Government will be running an information campaign about that childcare provision. And I would really like to see it being a campaign that didn't portray mothers dropping children off at the school gate and portrayed a more varied picture of family life, and put forward the idea that childcare was not just women's responsibility, it's a whole family responsibility. Lots of men are dropping their children off at school. And just to follow on with one quick point in terms of that kind of marketing, as Neil said, a lot of the people that work in early years are women, and that's often quite difficult for men coming in. In Parenting Across Scotland, we have a website that has information for parents. And after a bit of research and finding out that there was relatively little, or fathers thought there was relatively little information for men, it's not particularly marketed at men, we put all that information together on the website, information for dads. And we ran a marketing campaign that, I know not all men like football, and that's very stereotyping of me, but we took our marketing campaign and we advertised in football programmes and said we have this information for fathers on the website. And we monitored that, and the rise in visits to that part of the website was really high. And so I think, there probably are things that can be done to think, how do we reach more men? Where are the places that men go? Let's portray men as being an integral part of the family, and I think that involvement also is enhanced.
Thank you. David.
Thank you. I would like to give a little perspective on all this, because I think there are many examples, and I imagine last week you heard examples of worst practice, if you like. And I want to offer that I believe this is something in our culture and our society against men, and it's unconscious. But what it means, the evidence of it, is that with Fathers Network Scotland, we've worked with a number of antenatal agencies. So we've worked with NHS Health Lothian, NCT, and other NHS antenatal practitioners, and we worked on the Dads to Be pack. And what we're finding, Kenny and I think it was just Kenny and I worked on the NHS Health Scotland's Ready Steady Baby pack, which goes out to anyone who's pregnant, and it speaks only to women. It mentions that you might have a partner, and there are a couple of clauses in there that say, well, if you're a dad or the partner, this is what you could be doing. But generally, it's talking to women, and all the imagery is about women. But what I want to offer is, rather than picking out and naming and shaming and blaming people, I think this is across the board. What I would like to offer is, as Thomas says, if we can get antenatal right, we can engage fathers at the very beginning. 'Cause too often they think these services aren't for me, I'm not meant to be involved, I'm a spare part. Lots of negative messages come up through the imagery and the language that is used around these services. And I, again, would like to direct anyone who hasn't looked at it, the Where's Dad paper from Gary Clapton, because it's a wake-up call as to how we're talking about the whole family and children. Because I believe we want to be the best country to grow up in. And we want to get it right for every child. And we know that fathers are an important part of a child's life. So when we're systematically excluding them, we're not getting it right for every child.
Thank you. Robert.
Yeah, when we were here last week, 3 of my dads were here last week giving evidence, and certainly both themselves and more of the dads at the group did feel excluded from the process of pre- and postnatal care. Having been through that myself, I also feel the same, and feel that there are lots of things that could be done to assist that process and make things better. It was very much almost stand in the corner, don't say anything, don't move, don't touch anything, and all will be fine. And that's great, and maybe some dads are happy with that, but you want to actually be involved in the care of your children. You want to be involved with every aspect of that process, and to be told that actually you probably can't, and certainly in some cases in the postnatal care, to be told you can't attend workshops because that might upset mums is difficult, because it reduces your ability to assist that whole process of supporting your wife or partner or whoever that happens to be. Breastfeeding was horrendous for me because I knew nothing about it. I wasn't allowed to go to the workshop. I wasn't allowed to attend a support group. I couldn't go to any of that sort of stuff. And I'm in a unique position that actually I work for the health board where my child was born. And I still can't get access to that sort of information. And even the information that we got, in the hospital, the sort of booklet that you get when your baby's first born, literally had a paragraph about that size about dads, and then everything else was to do with ladies. So you get that sort of feeling right from the get-go that actually it's not that you're less valued, but, you know, you don't really count much. When actually, you know, for dads who want to be involved, it's then difficult because you feel like, you know, why should you? But you want to, and you keep pushing at it and keep pushing at it, and it doesn't seem to make any difference. And it's very frustrating for a lot of the dads, you know, and that's the thing that comes out of my group is a great frustration about the whole process, that, you know, you feel undervalued. I mean, we're not trying to replace mums in any way, shape or form at all, but you want to provide the best support that you can for your children and your partner, you know, or wife or whatever that happens to be. And that is stressful in its own right, actually.
It actually sounds as if you're on the outside looking in.
Yeah, absolutely. You're just not involved in that part of the care at all when you really want to be. I'm very hands-on. You know, I'm very lucky that the NHS have allowed me to work compressed hours so that I actually can get a hold of you on a Wednesday with, you know, my baby, to take her swimming, to do things with her. I'm very proactive that way, and I want to do this. But the message that comes out of the care, and again, as Thomas was saying, it's more to do with the fact that there's less of them and they need more staff, and I understand that because I work in that area, so you get that. But they need to engage with dads because that's part of that whole support mechanism.
Yeah, that's true. Kenny?
I mean, I think we're really at an unfortunate time in terms of our understanding of babies and their development. We now know that 80% of the brain is developed before you're 4 years old, and therefore all of the things that you need to learn, or a lot of things you need to learn, are happening before then. So if we think it's early enough for a father to become involved at 6 months or a year, then it's 6 months too late or a year too late. We kind of know that the first few months are absolutely crucial. There's all sorts of research done in terms of fathers bonding as well with their children as mothers do. We should be promoting that because we now know that that's... The more adults that talk to you as a small child, the better your speech and language will develop. If your mother and father both talk to you, then your language will increase exponentially compared to just one parent talking to you. So, you know, and you don't have to necessarily live together, but being involved is really important. If the dad stays involved for the first 3 years of a child's life, he's likely to stay involved all the way through. So we've got some need for us to promote that. I think that, you know, and in terms of children falling behind, they're much more likely to fall behind the less input they have in the early period of their life. There's a great deal of work done in terms of postnatal depression, that if a child's parent is postnatally depressed, then another adult that's not postnatally depressed being around that child can in fact increase that child's chances of smiling and responding and doing all those things completely naturally, because, and they've done so much research at Edinburgh University and, you know, in terms of evidence in that. So I think the earlier we can get dads involved from pre-birth, ideally, but postnatal services. Part of the difficulty in some ways is that we've set up the Early Years Collaborative and got 700 people together from across Scotland, and the stretch aims were initially based on maternal health and maternal outcomes, and it took quite a bit of lobbying actually to say, no, it's about both parents. So even our starting point of how we do better for early years was kind of based on the premise that we've been talking about, which is fathers are not necessarily involved or included. So it has to be in the way that we're talking about father-proofing and all those things, they have to be a priority for us, because if we don't mention men and fathers by name, then they'll not be included. And I think that's one of the fundamental things that we need to get right. But also that we need to have the conversation with NHS and saying the postnatal services have to be for both parents because it's in the child's interest. It's not necessarily about being in the dad's interest, it's actually in the child's interest that we get this right.
I'm actually, when you're talking, I'm actually thinking of when I was actually having my own children. Fathers were very much excluded, and I did actually suffer from postnatal depression, and it would have been so helpful if your husband understood exactly what you were going through and could actually help you. So I'm listening to you, and I think it would be so much more helpful to the parents, the mothers going through this, if the fathers were included and they knew exactly what the journey was like for the mother from the start as well to help. So I think that's really, really important. Thomas?
I was just going to, you know, oddly enough, agree with everything that people are saying. And I think, speaking to our parents, all they want is a wee bit of support. They don't want charity. They don't want the nanny state. They just want a bit of support from people, and they just want a bit of a hand. You know, I think that we have got a huge opportunity in this country to really do something and to just to make a change. And I think we're continually on the cusp of being a bit brave. Let's just do it. I'm convinced we can find the money if we really want to find the money. And, you know, I think that, I know some parties have stolen the word transformation or revolution, but, you know, I do think whatever word you want to use, I think it could be. And I think that if you do that, you're sending a direct message. We just need to produce some positive images of fatherhood. And as Dads Rock, that's what we're trying to do. And we will use any opportunity to show a dad having a laugh or rocking out with their kid, because we need to get rid of this image of family being a mum and kids. And I understand why it's ended up like that, but I think we've got a great opportunity now to do something about it.
Excellent. David and Alex.
I just wanted to echo what's been said and draw attention to the fact that this isn't about fathers' rights. This isn't because it's not fair. This is actually about the health of our children and our families and our communities. And I believe that that's the crucial thing. If we're really concerned about doing the best we can for our children and families, then we have to start taking note of this stuff.
Before we leave this subject and go on to somebody else, another line of questioning, I just wanted to reflect on what we heard last week and ask for comment on one other aspect. What's excluding men from the lives of their children in the early years is, we've heard, availability. You know, men aren't welcome in some circumstances. There's also take-up in that many men choose not to become involved, unfortunately. But there was one other aspect that was raised last week, and that was the fact that many men who have become involved in taking their children, young children, to classes where it's predominantly women who take their children there, actually feel socially excluded within these groups. Is that experience one that you would comment on?
I've got hands up everywhere. David was first, Robert, and then Kenny.
I heard a great story yesterday from a dad who'd come through from Fife, and he was with his partner and daughter, and he told me that he'd gone along to a parent and toddler group, and he was refused entry because he was a man, and he had to take his daughter elsewhere to the park to play.
Robert? Robert.
There you go. Yep, we've, you know, the guys that were here last week again did have issues with that, and certainly I went to two sort of parent and toddler groups before I went to my group as it stands now, and in one I wasn't spoken to at all for the whole period of time that I was there by anyone, and in the other one I had 24 mothers trying to do everything for me. Both of which weren't particularly helpful. Certainly the other one was a lot more friendly and I didn't really, but you know, they were even saying, "Oh, I'll change her." No, you're fine, it's fine. I can actually, you know, I do that in the house and everything else. So it's difficult because, you know, you go to places and it seems to be two extremes. They're either, you know, really, really friendly and desperate to do everything for you, which is not what I want. I just want to go and spend time with my daughter, and, you know, if she needs changed, I'll change her. If she needs fed, I'll feed her. You know, I don't need somebody else to do that for me, or I would maybe employ a nanny if I could afford one. But, you know, going to that other group, you know, literally for an hour and a half, nobody even came and said hello, spoke to me, anything at all, and just didn't make you feel welcome at all. So it certainly causes issues and problems, and that's why now that I run a group, we try and make sure that it's as friendly as possible. The minute somebody new arrives, you know, I'll certainly go up and welcome them personally. I'll get the guys to go up and say to them, you know, I say to them, please feel free to you know, mingle with other dads, have a chat, see, you know, who's who, what they're doing, you know, and actively encourage engagement with other dads, because that's the whole point of having a dad's group.
Other thumbs up.
Well, we're actually in that position where actually it's a dads only group, but we do have the occasional mum who comes along, and she's made more than welcome as well, because that's how it works and what we do. And a lot of the people who come and do our play activities and craft activities and things like that are also ladies, and they're also made more than welcome. We'll make them coffee, give them biscuits. You know, we'll feed anybody. We're guys. You know, that's how that works. And I think that's the key to the whole thing. But inclusivity is the main thing, because if you go somewhere and you don't feel welcome, you just won't go back.
That's true. Kenny and then Thomas.
I mean, I think the interesting thing is, as well as managing the Dad's Club, I also manage a men in childcare project where we try and get men working in early years. And initially, it was quite difficult because we decided to put the guys into the colleges and doing a full-time course, and out of 6 only 1 remained, so we decided to set up men-only courses, and we've had now about 2,000 guys actually attend some training just to become either to work in childcare, to do better parenting, or to understand child development better. So guys are interested. You know, if you put something out there that they can come to and they'll attend, they are interested. It's not there's not a level of interest, and we've so men have come. So I think and I don't know the best way to target these kind of postnatal groups, and I think you've discovered the way to target the parent and toddler groups, which is to make it dads only, and similarly the dads club, it's a dads group, and men will come to be around men, and I think that's the way to work it. And I don't know how we do that in terms of postnatal support, and I guess that's probably the next nut to try and crack. But certainly the guys are interested and have come, and every time we put adverts in the paper they do phone up and they do say they'd like to attend the training. So there is a level of interest out there. It's how we then do the next bit, which is the postnatal and prenatal stuff.
That's excellent. Thomas, and then Michelle.
I was just going to say, it always reminds me of the Two Ronnies sketch. They had a sketch about, I think it was called The Worm That Turned, where basically the world was flipped upside down and the women were these very dominant beings and the men wore dresses and had to be very sort of cap in hand. And I think that's kind of where we are, in that, we're talking about these things. They're saying that dads find it funny to go to a group full of women. I don't think it's just dads. I've spoken to mums who find it intimidating to go to playgroups. And I think that's just people sometimes. Unfortunately, people are a bit cliquey and they're a wee bit separatist and they're a wee bit like not wanting to be too friendly. My wife had that experience of going to playgroups. But, that's why we set up Dads Rock, because we had that experience. We wanted somewhere fun, positive and friendly. But interestingly, when we do get women coming to speak to the dads or to do stuff or to do crafty stuff like Robert, a lot of them say, it's quite intimidating, isn't it? Being surrounded by all these men and all these kids in the room. So it's just that different energy. Like, I love the fact that in my son's nursery there was a male worker and my son's first school teacher is a male teacher. And you say, well, what's the difference? What difference does it make whether it's a man or a woman? And I think that's really a hard thing to put your finger on. It's like it just does. There's just a different energy in the room, and you just expect there to be that balance, because is that not what we have in society? Do we not have a mix of men and women? So why do we have 2% of the early year workforce as men? I think Kenny's initiative and their programme is amazing, and I think the more money we can throw at that and the more we can do to build the confidence and resilience of that, we need to do that, because that's a good thing to do.
Thank you, Michelle.
Teen Parent Project in covering Fife predominantly works with teen mothers, and it's been a real challenge getting teen dads involved in that, and that's just sheer intimidation, feel as if they're going to be judged. And as a workforce, we've had to work really, really hard to include dads, create activities like football clubs or dad-only groups in Buckhaven, the Fife Rocks that started, and that has proven a challenge because of the vulnerable group that we work with. But we just have to keep working smarter and working harder to try and integrate dads with the antenatal classes.
David and then Neil.
I've been intrigued as to why, looking at Gary's paper on Where's Dad, how fathers are systematically not in the picture, in the language or the images. And this is my own personal take on it, is that we, in our culture and society, we believe that men exist on a spectrum of either, at best, useless, or at worst, violent, abusive, a risk. So that for me, that explains a lot. When people don't engage with dads, they don't want to, because they're a potential risk, and it's such a one-dimensional view of men, and I think that's what underpins it. And it's not just that this exists in the culture. It's in the culture of organisations, but it's also in the hearts of minds of everyone, including dads themselves. And there's a couple of examples that, for me, really illustrate that. I was walking with my family and my son in the park last year, and there was a little girl on a scooter, and she was going down a hill, and she went over and started crying. And her mother was about 100 yards away because she'd gone ahead. But there was a young man standing next to her. You know, she'd fallen right next to this young man. He looked towards the mother and started stepping back. And why on earth wouldn't someone go and pick up that child? Well, because I believe he doesn't want to be seen as a potential risk to that girl. What are you doing touching? And I've heard so many examples of men, you know, please don't come near my children, or what are you doing in a nursery? The other example is, Kenny might have the correct version of this, but there was a young man who brought up his 2 children himself, and he was wonderful with his kids. But he was unemployed, and when they started going to school, he wanted to get a job. And it was suggested, because he was so good with the kids, why don't you sign up with men in childcare? And he was thrilled at this prospect, because he'd loved working with bringing up his own kids, and he knew that he'd be good at it. The next time that whoever had suggested this to him saw him, he said, "How's it going?" "Well, I'm not going to do it." When he quizzed him, it turned out that he'd been down the pub with his mates, and they started calling him a pedo. And that was his mates. So this stuff is inside us, you know. This isn't the blame of the NHS or anyone else. This is in our culture. And we've got to, you know, having more positive examples, starting to talk about men from an assets-based approach. So we're not always looking at them as risks, but, you know, they're an asset to the family, an asset to a mother who's going through postnatal depression. You know, they're part of the family. They're a resource. Let's start looking at men and fathers like that.
Thank you. Neil?
I was just going to go back to Alex's point about the different types of services for mothers and fathers. At One Parent Families Scotland, we've been running services for lone parent fathers for 12 years. And we evaluated our early action project in 2012, and what came out of that research was that the fathers said that our peer support groups that we offer for men, which are men only, or for men and their children, was the successful factor in that group, in that piece of research, and that in turn improved the outcomes for the children of these lone parent fathers as well. And the fathers, when we were doing the preparation for this, had said they would like to see more services like that across Scotland. At the moment, we only operate in Edinburgh, Dundee, Falkirk and North Lanarkshire. I'm aware that there's other services like Dad's Rock who operate in various different places. So again, it's this sporadic services available for fathers, especially lone fathers as well.
Can I actually ask, Neil, how you actually contact and reach out to the lone fathers as well?
Very similar to what Fife Gingerbread do in terms of referrals from social work, health, education. But we are really proactive with our outreach service, and we go out to places that dads are and go up and speak to fathers. We've done knocking on doors, telling people about our services, and we'll go to places like football grounds and things like that where there are groups of men that we know are where they are. So
when you actually do chapping doors or go to football grounds, what kind of response do you actually get from them?
Our response is if we identify ourselves with we have clothing that makes you look, you know, you're part of that. If people know that, then that's okay. But sometimes we can be viewed with suspicion because some fathers presume that we're social workers, and then until you explain that actually, no, we're a very different service. We're here to support you, and introduce you to other fathers and their children as well.
So when you actually get past that barrier and you actually tell them what service you actually have to offer, how do they respond then?
Normally what happens is our children and fathers worker, who is male, normally meets them on a one-to-one basis, finds out what the issues are within the family, what kind of problems that the child is facing, and puts together an action plan using the GIRFEC model, the Shinari indicators from that, to conduct a kind of baseline assessment of where that family are and what support they need. And then once we've done some one-to-one work with the father, we then introduce them into our groups with other fathers and their children. They normally take place on a Saturday, where we will go out to a low-cost, sustainable, healthy sort of learning type activity with a group of, say, 8 or 9 different fathers and their children. And they'll come with us, and then they'll maybe move on to a specific parenting programme that we would run. We're currently running one in Falkirk at the minute in partnership with Mellow Parenting, which is called Mellow Dads. It's proven quite successful already. There's 7 fathers just signed up to take part in that programme.
Excellent, thank you very much. We're going to move on now to healthcare and education, and I'll pass you over to John Mason.
Okay, thanks, Convener. Yes, I mean, it's been fascinating so far, and it's been quite general, and also we concentrated a bit in the early years. So it was to think, well, specifically about schools, and, well, the NHS has been mentioned already, but we can go back to that perhaps. So, I mean, there have been suggestions that it is difficult for fathers to engage with schools, and that, especially if the parents aren't living together, that the school will almost inevitably refer issues to the mother. And even though there are legal provisions, as I understand it, Education Act 1980, etc., that suggest that both parents should be involved. So I suppose my first question is that the case in your experience? Is that what people are finding? Also, if it's particularly appropriate for your organisation, are you engaging already in trying to change schools? And or what can we do, or what should we be doing in that area? Because, I mean, I take the point that's been made already that if we can start with antenatal, everything will kind of work through gradually, but I think probably we also need to do some tackling in the middle of the system as well.
Okay, Kenny, then Michelle, and then Ewan.
I guess one of the difficulties we've got in Scotland is that 40% of primary schools have no males at all. In Fife there are 129 schools, and 109 of them have no men or only one man. I did some research with the universities and things to find out, in terms of the men come for teacher training, whether in fact there's a problem with that and not enough men applying. What I found out with Strathclyde, for example, was there were more men applying and less men getting in gradually over the last 3 or 4 years. So there are men applying to get into teaching, but we haven't done the same thing in teaching as we've done in early years, which has said we need more men in teaching. And I think that it's already hard enough. I think that when my daughter was at school, the engagement I had with the school was one evening a year, or one evening a term, depending on the school, I'd be invited in to hear how she was doing. And other than that, not an awful lot of contact. So schools are not necessarily the most open places for either parent. But if you're an estranged dad, then often you don't get the information. And although you're right, there's a legal responsibility. When Families Need Fathers did a poll, they found that a lot of schools still weren't actually fulfilling their legal responsibility. So there is a problem. There's a problem in feeling that there are not enough men in there anyway. And that's a problem for us as a society. I think that if you were a little girl and you came out home from hospital and it was just your dad's and your dad's friends, you went to nursery and it was all men, then you went to primary and it was all men, what kind of little girl would you grow up to be? And yet we think that's okay for our little boys. And I think that's an indictment on us, that we should be addressing that.
Is that a problem you feel is getting worse, you know, not just over the last couple of years, but say 40, 50 years, or has it just always been the case that primary schools were mainly women teachers?
No, it's getting worse. It is getting definitely worse. The problem is increasing in the percentage of schools that have no men. And often the argument is given that if the men then come in, they'll go into promoted posts. I don't know if that's a spurious argument or not, but to have no men so that there are not male head teachers, it's not a very good argument either. You know, so the universities have some responsibility in the first instance to recruit more male teachers, but the schools have got a responsibility to try, if they have no men, then at least start getting some.
When I was a counsellor, I did a lot of interviewing for head teachers for primary schools, and you know, we were so desperate to get men that, you know, sometimes you would try and guarantee that 1 out of 6 was a guy, but very often we couldn't do it. They just weren't, either they weren't applying or they just weren't, you know, appropriate.
Michelle, and then Ewan.
The issues that we've received, that we've experienced with education, with in particular lone dads, is when there's issues in the household and it's impacting on the children's well-being and affecting their schooling, that you find that dads find it very, very difficult to approach the schools because it is predominantly females. And to bear their vulnerabilities to females is extremely challenging. And they come back to our organisation when the crisis is so extreme. One particular father that I supported is a lone dad of 2 boys who had to relocate from Edinburgh to Cooper, which is a rural area in Fife, and not knowing the area. The kids were entered in, one child was entered into one primary school and another child was moving up to another to primary 1. The school, not knowing the situation, and Dad feeling quite reluctant to go and speak to the teachers about it, Education had allocated a place to the youngest child at another primary school. So both boys were separated, and this dad was also trying to work, which created huge stresses for this lone dad in a rural area with lack of services anyway. Dad did try to speak to Education, but it fell on deaf ears, and it wasn't until he come to Fife Gingerbread that we spoke to Head Education. And to get that young boy placed with his brother, the dad had to literally give his full story, why he was a lone parent, why he had no parental additional supports and networks in that area. But I think if there was more male role models in the school through teachers, you would find dads would be more accessible in discussing their issues, particularly vulnerable issues.
I have got Ewan coming in just now, and then David.
Thank you. It's a common topic of discussion at our groups about if your child, well, when your child is at school and 2 things happen. There's either maybe an issue, as happens, and whether the school was prepared. The school always phone mum first. Always phone mum first, regardless of what's in the notes. But the second thing is in relation to parent-teacher evenings. Not all of our members are separated, but for those that are, it's quite difficult sometimes to get a separate parent-teacher session if mum says you're not to speak to dad. Mums are given, or we'll have to check with mum first whether or not we're allowed to speak to you. And this isn't a gay issue. This is just a parenting issue that schools give. Some schools have a tendency to give a sort of default, unthinking emphasis to mother's position, and also to, and as far as I'm aware, this is against the law, but nonetheless to accept a veto from the mother about speaking to the father. And you know, not all of our outcomes are unhappy outcomes, but for the small minority that are, it's another devastating aspect of the marital breakdown, and that applies to straight couples as well as if the father is gay. That schools aren't as sympathetic, I think, as they need to be to the position of separated or divorced fathers. And I don't know if you'll come on to this, but there is an issue that affects gay fathers in respect of homophobic bullying at schools, and could I just mark that as a possible discussion topic for later?
Okay, we'll bring that up later. I think, was it David? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I think that there's many answers, or there's many places to start, and I do think that in schools, again, systemically, because women are seen as, children are seen as women's business. Men aren't often engaged, especially if the parents are split up, and we've heard many stories about that, and I think Children in Scotland and Fathers Need Families are working specifically in that area at the moment. But I wanted to just name Kibble Education and Care Centre. They're a school through in Paisley, and around 2000 they looked at their staff. They're a school for boys, and they looked at their staff, and I think something like 80% of them were women, and they thought, hang on, what these boys need more than anything else, and these are troubled boys, they need good male role models. And so they started recruiting. They did a big campaign over several years of getting men from traditional industries into childcare. But it took a great effort, but the results were great. So they got suddenly men who hadn't been thinking about a profession for the same reasons, I think, because what are you doing as a man around children? Well, there must be something dodgy about that. So they kind of gave permission to men to start looking at that and inquire and say, actually, that's an alternative to career. So I think there's something around that we need to start inviting, giving permission to men to get into these places because they're needed.
John, are you okay now?
That's okay. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Maybe we could go back to Ewan just now, and I could maybe ask you this question as well as the one you want to actually speak about the bullying as well. Do you find that for gay couples, there's extra challenges for them who want to adopt a child at birth or surrogacy as well? Do you find that there's barriers put up and obstacles put in there?
I'm not very well qualified to answer that question because the majority of the men that we support are men who have been in a traditional marriage and have been in it for maybe 10 or 20 or 30 years, having entered into it at a time when societal attitudes were completely different. We do actually have some couples within our group who have actually got married. So you've got two gay dads who have children by female spouses originally, but the Children Adoption Bill, the Children Scotland Bill, that permitted gay adoption, as it were, as opposed to just one person adopting who happened to be gay or not. That wasn't an issue. It was the two people adopting. It is quite recent in the legislative process, and so there aren't that big a population of gay adopting parents. There's a small population in Scotland of people who've adopted through surrogacy, often abroad, and I know one couple who have children who have a daughter who is now just about to go to university, who they adopted through surrogacy. But the issues affecting adoptive parents are still very early in the evolutionary process, and we, in fact, as a group, at the moment, all I can do, if I get quite a lot of inquiries from people wishing to, considering adopting, or saying, hey, we've just adopted, and I refer them to the contacts at the British Association of Adopting and Fostering, who I had contact with previously during the adoption bill process, and so I can't really answer that very, very authoritatively.
Do you want to talk about the issue you wanted to bring up?
Yes, the issue. I don't want to address the issue. Well, there's two big issues. There's the big issue of general homophobic bullying at schools, but because this is a parenting discussion, perhaps it would be more appropriate if I focused on the issue of parents having children at schools and where the child is bullied, either because their parents are, primarily because one of their parents is gay, and there's an unacceptably large amount of homophobic bullying in schools, and the equalities organisation Stonewall and such like are running campaigns against it in general. Our experience as a parenting group is that it's quite common, once the word is out that dad is gay, for the child to be bullied, or an attempt to be made to bully the child. And we counsel, as such as we do counsel the fathers, that, that bullying is unfortunately at the moment part of school life, and that they will pick on any difference. A bully will pick on any difference. And so it's not a reason not to come out to your children, because the bully would pick on your child if they had red hair or the wrong trainers, just as much as if dad is gay. And the important thing is the reaction of the school to that. And we've had reports of both excellent interventions and fairly pathetic, mealy-mouthed interventions. And the excellent interventions are that it's dealt with straight away. It's sometimes taken to school assemblies without naming the individuals. And in other cases, it's, well, what do you expect?
John Finney and Mark Obiagi would like to come in this as well.
Thank you, Convener. Eunice, it's following on from that. In your evidence, you talk about societal change probably affecting the profile of your members. So there was a traditional, if you like, hiding of the situation. As a result of that, is there going to be, if you like, a delay and a follow-on of a more liberal approach being taken? And I know that that's sometimes seen as an offensive term. I mean, the problem was hidden in the past. Now it's how it creates a problem which in turn will have to be addressed, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Well, it's a bit like wait for the bigots to die. There is an enormous societal change, a very welcome, thank you very much, societal change. And one of the things that we have to counsel people, dads who come to us about is that society isn't the same as it was when they were young. And so they think their children will be bullied automatically, and we're good. Or they think their children will not accept that they're gay, because they're carrying within them the old homophobias, even though young people do not carry, on the whole, the same degree of, or any homophobia. Is that?
It does indeed. Thank you very much.
Marco.
I was wanting to slightly move off the gay dad's perspective, so if anybody else is on that. Well, the question really was, what was raised there was the playground experience. Have other dads had any kind of playground repercussions from being particularly involved? You know, if the dad shows up to pick up the child after school or something like that, are there any equivalent experiences?
Thomas.
I would just say, my mum says that I've retired, but I've taken redundancy from large banking corporation. And so I've been doing more of the school drop-off and pick-up. And my experience is similar to, I think, what Claire was alluding to earlier by saying it's the whole family that do drop-off. It's granddad, it's auntie, it's a whole mix of people. So it's not uncommon for there to be lots of men standing around trying not to speak to anybody in the playground and being uncomfortable, and then the mums standing in their little groups. So, you know, I've certainly not experienced anything like that, and my son will often say to me, why does mummy not pick me up more than you? So, personally, no, and I've not heard any of our members mention that.
Robert?
Yep, it's similar to Thomas. My daughter's not at school yet, she's only 15 months old, but I'm quite buoyed by the fact that when I drop my daughter off to our local nursery, usually around about kind of like 10 past 8, before I started working my compressed hours, it was actually 7 or 8 dads that were dropping off their children. I actually only have seen 2 or 3 mums in the 4 or 5 occasions that I've done that, actually dropping off their kids. It appears mostly to be dads that are doing that sort of process, so that was actually quite nice, because I expect it to be almost the total polar opposite, but it does look like dads are getting, and it's nice to see, because that's the whole point. You want to be involved with your kids and do that sort of thing. And you know, I have lost that now because I work my compressed hours, but I get that Wednesday off, which is better. But certainly before that, it seemed to be mostly dads that were doing the drop-offs, which was nice.
Thank you. Christian, I don't know if you want to ask a question relating to this, or you want to move on to another question.
I don't know if Mark was finished.
Are you finished yet?
No, a couple of questions.
Wants to come in on this at the last minute?
Sorry, it was really to echo, or not to echo, to something that Ewan had said. And, you know, although, quick point, I know we've moved on from the subject, but although you know, to an extent, homophobic attitudes have moved on. Nonetheless, they still exist, and I know that one of our organisations who deals with counselling has found that they've actually recently moved, or they are attempting to move from where they are, because the venue that they were using would not counsel gay couples. And, you know, just throwing that in as another example of how difficult it can be for gay couples with children.
Thank you, Claire. Christian.
Yes, thanks very much, Commander. Just a couple of questions to subject. One subject will be the minorities, and I think we dealt with some of them, but I'm thinking about other minorities that maybe some of your organisation are not, don't get fathers coming to your groups. We're talking about, I've seen in the evidence, the experience of father who ended up in prison, and how this work, and if anybody's got some feedback on this. And other minorities, maybe, that we have not talked about yet. But for example, you know, fathers lose their jobs and isolated, who have problem of residency, haven't got a spare bedroom. So maybe some of your organisation wants to talk about that.
Claire, then Kenny, and then Michelle.
Okay. I wanted to speak a little bit. I put something in my evidence about fathers in prison because I think that they're a group that's not often considered, and they are actually a pretty large group, really. I think Prison Service themselves estimate that 48% of their population are parents. 17,000 children in Scotland are affected by a parent's imprisonment, so they are a fairly significant group. And I suppose there's a number of things. One is that estimates are that reoffending is reduced by up to 6 times. And even the most conservative estimates, which would be the Ministry of Justice estimates from a couple of years ago, are about a 39% reduction in reoffending. Now, obviously, that is to do with the parent, and perhaps we're looking at outcomes for children as well. But even that, you know, children are seen to want to have contact with their parents. And at the moment, in the prison estate in Scotland, there is a great inconsistency. We do welcome, I mean, there was a letter from the SPS to all the governors in October of last year, talking about new parenting outcomes that they have and what they'd like to achieve for parents. But there's a number of things. There are more visiting centres that are suitable for children now, but we'd welcome more of that being the case, more visiting centres for children. It's very difficult where a father has been non-resident before and where there are estranged or strained relationships for that child to then visit a prison, because there's nobody to take them to visit their father. So, for example, Families Outside were telling me yesterday that they have been supporting a parent who was a lone parent dad who had sole custody and has gone in for a prison sentence. The relationships between that child and his father were very good. What's happened is that the maternal grandmother has taken over care of the child. And in that instance, there is a degree of animosity, and the maternal grandmother will not take the child to visit prison. So they have been trying to put arrangements into place, but there are no funds to do so, no support mechanisms. So I think the issues are about consistency, about access, and in terms of information, there's about, you know, remembering that actually prisoners, generally speaking, have no access to websites that might help them. There are a number of very encouraging things going on. There are parenting programmes taking place. The SPPA, Scottish Preschool Play Association, going to Dumfries Prison. I know that Dad's Rock are perhaps looking about going into Edinburgh. There's a number of things, and I think some of also the educational work around things like parenting apart or parenting programmes are about communication, are about relationships. They improve the relationships on the parenting level, but they also improve, you know, the offender's chance when they go out back into the community of establishing a more resettled life and relationships with their family. Thank you.
Kenny.
Yeah, I did some work in Edinburgh Prison a few years ago, and I think the best work I've actually seen happening in Scotland is the work that went on in Shotts Prison with the video work with the fathers reading the stories to their children and that going back and forwards. And I think that was an excellent example. And Scottish Prison Service have been very, very open to any kind of engagement with the dads that are in prison, so I can only commend them for that. In terms of fathers who've got difficulty with residency or becoming the sole parent for the child, I think that I also work in a child and family centre, a children's centre, and so we have a lot of situations where there is conflict between the parents, and you know, one or other may be not managing to parent very well. In my experience, it's been much more difficult for children's hearings and social workers to agree that dad might necessarily be the best parent to take that child, and if they do decide that, he usually has a lot more hurdles to jump through than if the opposite situation was happening. So much more supervised contacts, much more visits going on, a longer process of rehabilitation, a longer process of making sure that he can actually do it. And not that I'm saying that it's too long for the dads, it's just a different consistency in terms of what's expected of the dad and of the mum. And our dads workers had done a lot of support with dads to make sure that he's gone to the hearings or to the chaptation case conferences or any of those kind of things, because it's been essential that somebody's actually there to advocate on behalf of the guys, because a lot of them would have just given up. And so having somebody there advocating on their behalf has been essential to actually make sure that they manage to get their child and keep their child and parent their child.
Michelle and then Neil.
I've had brief but a long-term experience working with a particular family in Fife, and it was the parent was referred to as she became a lone parent because the husband was in prison for 4 years. And I suppose it was dual support that was offered there, because there was a lot of frustrations and anger with the mother towards the father, towards her partner, and what had happened, and it was an unfortunate situation that what happened. But the impact on that family was enormous. It was huge, because she was also caring for 2 disabled children, and dad was the main carer. He was the main carer to allow mum to work. And then they became, well, mum considered herself as a lone mother, but dad also, when he was in prison, considered himself as a lone dad. And the support mechanisms for that dad in prison was extremely limited, because there's a lot of gatekeeping. There's a lot of gatekeeping and who can go in and support this dad, and where the referrals come from, and who they go to. But the organisation Families Outside were extremely valuable to the mum in the community and the dad in prison, as well as the organisations that supported this family, because the supports that were put in place was counselling for the children and trying to understand why dad was where he was, and why they'd lost the male role model in their family. And it was devastating, because there was social work services involved with a family that never had social work in their life before. Police were involved that never had police presence before in their life. They did have clinical psychologists to help with the children. That was increased, that support was increased. Penumbra was brought in to help with emotions for the children. 2.5, 3 years piece of work went in with this family, with Families Outside and Roots Out of Prison. We had a lot of dialogue with Roots Out of Prison, and they provided a lot of support to the dad when he was in preparation to be released. But the parenting support through Five Gingerbread, Penumbra and the other agencies had to be really joined up for this family, because they were coming back together again, but there was still a lot of resentment. This is quite a successful story, but it was a real challenge for 4 years, a real 3.5 years.
Neil?
Yeah, it kind of follows on from Michelle's point, but it was the point that Christian made about about working with minority groups of fathers. Single fathers are a minority. There's only 8% of single parents in Scotland are single fathers, and they face significant barriers, as do all single parents, mums or fathers. And the media portrayal of single parents is terrible. It's really particularly awful, and a lot of it is very inaccurate as well. And at One Parent Family Scotland, we would like to see single parents, mother or father, being recognised for the good job that they are doing, rather than being condemned in the media.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to John Mason's going to ask about job centre input.
Well, in one sense it follows on, because we're looking at specific areas, and one of the other specific areas that came up last week was the job centre and the DWP. I mean, I have to confess I'm not a huge fan of theirs in any respect. That's maybe a bit cruel, but anyway, the suggestion's been made that they do tend to, again, assume that single parents or mothers, they're not particularly adaptable to single fathers. Actually will seem, it would appear, or it's been suggested, it would appear that they would help a single mother more than they would help a single father. So it was just to see if that was other people's experience or if that was patchy.
Any volunteers? Neil?
I would agree that the fathers that we spoke to in the last few weeks, separated fathers in particular, would echo what you've said.
One of the examples, for example, was they would maybe try and help the part-time jobs that would fit in with schools. They would find that for a woman, but might not find it for the father.
Yes, that's something that some of the fathers that we work with face, and the issue with how benefits are paid, especially for parents who have split care, 50% of care of the child. Some of the time that may go to the benefit payments would go to mother, and father would be left with nothing. We've had dads coming to us who are getting their kids at the weekend and don't have any money. I mean, no money, and that's us having to go to or refer them to food banks to get food for the weekend to feed their kids. I'm not saying that everything should be split 50% of the way. I think at One Parent Family Scotland we believe that everything should be in the best interests of that child, and decisions should be taken around the interests of that child. But I think consideration has to be given to that as well.
So are the DWP just kind of following the courts, or are the DWP actually making decisions themselves, do you think?
I'm not actually sure about that. So.
That's okay.
Michelle?
I think the DWP are following legislation. Right. Because what's happening is I have quite a lot of input with the Job Centre Plus and triage and working links. And this legislation keeps coming up all the time. We've had lone parents, be male or female, in the Job Centre, and I've been in with joint meetings with them. And the job searches that they're expected to do are... it's not really to meet their skills now, it's to get them off benefits. That's it. There is a make pay calculator, work pay calculator, to make sure that it's affordable for you. However, they've still got to meet targets. Lone dad, lone mum, lone kinship carer, if they're on your JSA, job seekers allowance, they have to meet these demands by the Job Centre Plus, and they've got to satisfy it with evidence, or they're sanctioned. They'll be sanctioned. So the Job Centre Plus are just following legislation. Yeah.
Yeah. There's an example that we were of a single father, a lone father. He has full custody of his child, who we've been working with recently, and he's now getting to the stage where he's been told he's ready to go back to work, so he'll come off a particular benefit to go into job seekers allowance. The thing is, this child had been in care, in the care of the mother, and due to a number of issues was taken into care of social work services, and this father fought to be given to be able to look after his son, and that happened. But because of that traumatic experience that child has went through, the father feels that he needs to be able to be there to support his child much more. So to go to things like weekly meetings at schools to look at how the child's doing in education. So he doesn't feel that he is ready to go back to work because of his caring responsibilities. And that's just one example. But that's something that, again, single fathers or single mothers face.
Thank you. Sorry, Michelle, will you want to say something else?
Yeah, I'm just going to add on to that. I mean, we could go on and on about this, but as a single father, they don't have, and with a no support network there, they don't have the backup of somebody else going in and picking up the kids up for school, or being able to attend a job centre appointment at 10 to 3 in the afternoon, because they are the only person there to pick up the children, or if they're missing an appointment with the job centre, being sanctioned because they've maybe been called to school because of behaviours, or there's a child in particular that I'm thinking about who has ADHD and Tourette's and is in the behaviour support at a Fife primary school, and the dad is called regularly to come and pick his child up. So he may have, what's the priority? Does he go and get the child who's kicking off at school, or attend the job seeker's appointment? If he doesn't attend the job seeker's appointment, then he's sanctioned. He was sanctioned for 4 months, for 4 weeks, which 4 weeks benefits, which impacts in debt.
Thank you. Siobhan, I think you want to talk about contacts.
Thanks, Convener. Well, just to say, obviously we talked about the societal changes earlier, you mentioned that about gay dads in particular, but I'm just wondering if the groups do any work with the wider family, in particular granddads, on the subject of changes in the carer role. We heard last week that there's lots of negative connotations when a male takes the lead in caring for their child, and particularly the wider family can't accept that that's the case. I'm just wondering if any groups do engage with the wider family, in particular granddads, in those situations.
Kenny.
Yeah, we work with a lot of, obviously through Child and Family Centre, there's a lot of granddads and things that have now taken kinship care responsibility for their child, and that's increased by about 30 or 40% since the recent legislation. So it's very, very common to have grandfathers, grandmothers, aunties and uncles and everything coming in who've now got the kinship care responsibility of their child, and we would provide a lot of support for them.
Claire and then Michelle.
I think some of the organisations that are part of our partnership do that work. I'd particularly talk about, well, two, I suppose, Children First and their relationship and support for kinship carers, and also Relationship Scotland. Relationship Scotland run a number of parenting apart classes in a number of areas throughout Scotland. Some of them have been done in association with some fathers groups. And parenting apart classes are classes where generally the people who have separated will be in separate groups quite often, but will work through what's best for the outcomes of the child, and trying to get parents to put that at the centre stage of things, because one of the things that's shown is, you know, whatever the composition of the family, whatever the makeup of that structure, what's bad for children and for their outcomes is conflict, whether that's in a family that's still together or it's in a family that's separated. So, and some of those groups, particularly I think some of the ones that have been run down in Lanarkshire, have been run with some grandparent involvement as well. Also, I know that Children First are one of the main support agencies for kinship carers and have a kinship care helpline, and again that's working with grandparents. But I think there probably is an amount of work to be done in some of those attitudes and change in attitudes, which I think some of our agencies are engaging with.
Thank you, Michelle.
The kinship carers that we've supported has lone granddads and lone grands. They lose their identity. They lose their identity. They lose what they thought they were driving. They were driving for their retirement. Through the support that we've given kinship carers recently is through our Gateway project. The Gateway project has offered a male kickabout, and the kinship granddads have come along with that, with their grandchildren, their grandsons and granddaughters, and that's been that initiative's been supported now by volunteers, and the volunteers are keeping that going in the form of it being the granddads or the families that are in the dads that are involved in the kickabout, and it's well attended.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, this is second-hand. I heard Gary Clapton talking yesterday in particular about social work and how often fathers are excluded if a family is broken up. And just the kind of obvious point, if a father isn't engaged with, we lose half of the kinship caring network, because if that man is ostracised by the family or not included, then where are his parents? Where are his brothers and sisters? I just wanted to make that point.
Do any other committee members have any questions they would like to ask the witnesses? Christian.
Yeah, I would like maybe to finish off, if we are finishing off on this, talking about what's the present and what's the future. We talked in the evidence last week about stereotyping of gender stereotyping, and how early the stereotyping can happen. And I just want to reflect on this and having your opinion. How far in your organization you're trying to combat the stereotyping in the choice of toys, in the choice of role play, and how we go about it? And do you think that the main cause of the problem that we unveiled is to do with the traditional role of fathers, the traditional role of mother? And how far do you think society should go to address this issue? Should we go to total gender neutrality or not?
Thomas, then Kenny.
I was recently asked if I wanted to spend some money in a certain American shop for toys for our kids. And as much as I love buying toys for kids and buying some cool stuff, there was part of me that just couldn't, because of the whole pink and blue thing. There's a really good campaign on Twitter called Let Toys Be Toys, and I think they've got an absolute point. You know, I'm not going to say that my son loves playing with dolls and loves playing with hoovers, but I know from being in the playgroups that kids generally don't care. And a lot of the boys love the prams in the playgroups. Anything that they can push and anything with babies, they'll go for them. So I think that it's a really good point. I think it's a really important point. I think it's going to be really difficult. I mean, my boy told me he wouldn't wear a pink T-shirt. You know, and we've never tried to segregate colours or anything, but he got that through media. He got that through watching TV. Okay, maybe I shouldn't allow him to watch so much TV, but you know, I think it's in our culture. So I think that's going to take a very long time. And I know somebody last week, one of the dads was saying they don't think we should have segregated groups. They think we should just have groups, and I absolutely agree. I'd love to say that parents just go to groups, but I think there's a reason that Dad's Rock has started. There's a reason that Robert has started. And it's because we, first of all, need to do this, I think, and then perhaps come back together. But in reference to toys and what we're gender stereotyping, I agree. I think there's a lot of interest now. There's a lot of knowledge about, you know, what to do and what not to do and what we want for our kids. So I think it's just about giving the kids free choice, free play. We look at the play strategy. We look at the United Nations, what they're saying about the right for kids to play. It's free play. It's not boys play or girls play.
Thank you, Kenny.
I find it really quite an interesting question. I've spent 25 years working in a non-typical, non-stereotypical occupation, working in childcare, where for a very long time I was the only man there, which is why I started men in childcare, so I could get more men, more pals alongside me, basically. So, and children in my 25 years of experience gravitate towards what toys they want to play with. They're not necessarily, but generally speaking, if the guys, of which there's now 7 guys in my work, are outside, they're the people that are kicking the ball. And in the main, it's the little boys that are kicking the ball. Not exclusively, but that's generally what happens. That, you know, the more rough and tumble play, it's likely to be the guys doing it. It's a really early in the kind of the early years workforce to have a gender discussion, because there are so few men anyway to talk about what kind of men they need to be. They just need to be more men in there. So it's a very difficult conversation in some ways to have when you've only got 4% of the workforce that are actually male. 50% of the children are boys and 50% of the children and girls are thereabouts. And yeah, there hasn't been the need to sort out the toys. The children will kind of sort out the toys. Little boys will sit down and play with dolls, little girls will sit down and play with castles, and I don't think there's a need. I mean, they've done a lot of work in Sweden and stuff, and part of the thing was that girls were doing better after 10 years old than boys were, and up to 10 they weren't doing as well. And so there was a woman decided that what she'd do is she'd separate the boys' play and the girls' play in order that girls did better even earlier, rather than that. So what we have got in some ways is they've acknowledged the problem in Germany, now have a boys' day. Because if you're a boy, you're much more likely to be put into care, you're much more likely to be in a school for behavioural difficulties, you're much more likely to be assaulted, you're much more likely to commit suicide. The outcomes for boys is much worse than the outcomes for girls, and they've now realised that we need to start paying much more attention to boys. So if we're talking about looking at things from that gender perspective, then I think paying more attention to what's actually happening for boys is a great idea. But I think in terms of toys, pretty much children pick themselves and they're quite happy to.
Thank you.
Traditional role of a father, you didn't approach that point. Is there a place for the traditional role, the traditional father figure? Or do you think that should move on? We should move on?
No, I think I'm a traditional father. I think I very much am. My daughter gave me this for Christmas. She's 18 and she's trained to be a primary teacher. So the apple didn't fall very far from the tree, but it shows that if you put it in, you get it back, you know. So I think that, I think I'm very much a traditional father. And I think I'm very happy with that. And I'm not, but as I said, in a non-traditional role. So, yeah.
Thank you. Claire?
I suppose there's a few things. I was thinking about traditional fathers, and I know there was a bit of research, I think it was Joseph Rowntree did, and it was with Asian fathers in Loughborough area. And interestingly, what they were all saying was, I want to be a different father from my father, and I feel that I'm different from other fathers. But presumably they weren't that different, but they were all saying they wanted to be, so I think there is a real change in how men see the role. I think that's really important for women's politics as well. That if actually men are taking more flexible working, at the moment they get refused it twice as much as women. If they, that would allow them to help more with the housework, something I'd certainly find very welcome in my house. But, I think it works both ways. And if we're integrated as families, then, we need to allow men to have that space. But equally, so that needs to happen and that needs to change. But I think some of the groups, I think also there is space for men's groups. There is space for women's groups. People have talked about, should all parents' group be open to men or open to women? I think sometimes there's good reasons for it. And sometimes there's issues about feeling comfortable. Robert talked about they've got a dads-only group. I don't know, as a single parent in an antenatal group, I welcome the women-only space. But equally, I accept that there needs to be space for fathers in antenatal groups. The thing I really wanted to say, moved on to other things, was actually in the educational system. We've talked a little bit about toys, but there's a programme called Roots of Empathy, which addresses really early on that attachment bond. It brings babies into schools and, both boys and girls see the importance of how babies react. I think that's a really interesting and very important thing that happens in the early years. It's been rolled out throughout Scotland. I'd like to see more schools having that. And in the teenage years, in their the personal health, the social education bit of the curriculum for excellence, there are opportunities around parenting which some of the evidence has identified. And I think that's particularly important at the moment. There's a lot of evidence around sexting, around bullying, around cyberbullying. And some of the kind of surveys have shown that a number of girls think that it's perfectly acceptable to be hit in relationship. There's some really unpleasant and throwback male attitudes there. And I think that we need, through the kind of education that we offer our children as teenagers as well, to really address that and make sure that, ideas of gender equality for both men and women and what good relationships are about are addressed at that point of opportunity.
Thank you. David and then Robert.
Yeah, I wanted to say the gender stereotyping, I think, is a symptom and not the main cause. I think what we want to be doing is celebrating differences. So celebrating the differences between men and women, and there are many differences, as we know, but celebrating the different types of dads that are out there. This isn't about prescribing what a dad should be. If a man is, you know, in a full-time job and the mother's at home, that's okay if that's how it works out, but the opposite applies. If a woman wants to be the full-time breadwinner and the man is taking care of the child, we want to celebrate how a family works. And it's wonderful to see you here, Ewan, expressing your voice in terms of gay dads, because I think a few years ago that wouldn't have been the case. This isn't about saying how men should turn up as fathers, it's about supporting them to be the best dads they can be.
Lastly, Robert.
Within our playgroup, we have a wide variety and range of toys for the kids to play with. You know, we went out and specifically bought a good range of things for them to play with. They don't stick to their stereotypes, and neither should they. That's the whole point. You know, you will have the most popular thing for the girls is the ride-on tractor. I think it's fantastic. You know, the boys will, you know, play with dolls. They will play with, you know, the prams that we have, all these different things. But in general, they pick toys and they play with them. It's whatever interests them at that moment in time. It's not true, actually. Usually it's whatever interests them is whatever some other kid has and wants to take off them and use, because that's more like it, but that's one of those things. For the traditional dads thing, it's difficult to quantify, because specifically from my point of view, I wanted to be different from my dad. My dad had very little to do with my care when I grew up, and that was probably because that was the 70s, that's what you did. He went out and worked and whatever else, but you know, I know from my mum that my dad bathed me once in the entire time of me being young, and I didn't want to be anything like that. I have to be fully involved in the care of my child because I want to be. I don't want to be something that goes out to work in the morning, comes home at night, sees my baby or child for an hour, and then they go to their bed. I want to be fully involved in all that sort of stuff, and I challenge traditional dad role these days, because it's what you make it, actually.
Thank you very much. That actually finishes us nicely off this meeting, unless anybody else has anything they would like to comment on briefly. No. So I will actually now conclude the public part of today's meeting, and our next meeting will take place on Thursday the 20th of March and will include further oral evidence on our inquiry into fathers and parenting. And I now suspend the meeting to move into private, and thank you all very much for coming along.